The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the office, mingling with the low hum of printers and the soft clatter of keyboards. Morning sunlight slipped between the blinds, striping the desks in gold. Maggie Thornton stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Have you ever sent a message you couldn't take back? The kind that lands before you realize what you've done, then your heart just stops. It happened at exactly 8. 47 mem. Inside Harrison and Cole Communications, a place where appearances meant everything and mistakes had long memories. Maggie wasn't reckless, just tired, honest to a fault, and maybe a little too caffeinated. The text was meant for her friend, a harmless bit of sarcasm before another endless day. Our boss looks like a Greek god but acts like he swallowed a rule book. The message flew off into cyberspace with a soft swoosh. Then came the sound ping, followed by a dozen more. The entire company chat lit up. And there, at the very bottom, 3 quiet words that froze her breath. Seen by Ethan Cole, the air felt heavier. Even the lights seemed to dim. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened, the sound of polished shoes against the floor. She thought it was just another ordinary morning at work. She couldn't have been more wrong. The first Monday of spring crept into Portland with a chill that clung to the windows. The city hadn't quite decided whether to wake up or go back to sleep. Inside the 10th floor of Harrison and Cole Communications, the lights hummed softly, coffee machines gurgled, and the faint buzz of printers filled the air like white noise. Maggie Thornton was already at her desk, 36 years old, 2 coffees deep, and still half convinced she could become invisible if she sat perfectly still. The blue glow of her monitor reflected off her glasses, highlighting the faint circles under her eyes. On her desk, Post-it notes formed a colorful battlefield of deadlines, client calls, and half-forgotten lunch reminders. She rubbed her temples and muttered, "Just another Monday. Maggie, you've survived worse." A notification blinked on her screen. Team chat. Good morning. Everyone followed by a cascade of cheerful emojis. She grimaced. There was always someone too happy before 9. Her phone buzzed. A message from her friend, Tessa. Popped up Tessa. He's early again. Mr. Perfect Hair just walked in. Maggie glanced through the glass walls of the conference room. Ethan Cole, CEO of Harrison and Cole, was there already precisely at 8:30, as always. Tall, composed. The kind of man who probably aligned his pens before leaving a room. His navy suit looked as though it had been ironed by angels. She didn't dislike him exactly. She respected him. But sometimes, Ethan Cole made her feel like she existed in grayscale while he moved in full color, precise, flawless, untouchable. Her phone buzzed again. Tessa. Tell me that man isn't carved out of marble. Maggie smirked, typing quickly under the desk. Maggie. Our boss looks like a Greek god but acts like he swallowed a rule book. She hit send. A perfect private moment of catharsis until she looked up and saw the notification bar. Message sent to company group Chat 23 participants. Her stomach dropped. For a moment, everything inside her froze. The hum of the printers stopped existing. The tapping keyboards faded. Her own pulse filled her ears. No, no, no. She fumbled for the phone, thumb trembling as she stared at the screen, willing the message to vanish, to undo itself, to pretend it never happened. The tiny gray bubble popped, seen by marketing team, HR, finance, Ethan Cole. The air thickened, the way it does just before thunder. Around her, the office noise started to creep back. Someone stifled a laugh 2 cubicles away. A whisper drifted. She didn't dare look up. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, desperate to type something clever, something to turn it into a joke, but her mind had gone completely blank, like a wiped chalkboard. Play it cool, Maggie. Play it morning, Maggie. Her head snapped up. Ethan stood by the coffee station, 10 feet away, calm, unreadable. His hand rested lightly on a porcelain mug. Their eyes met for half a second, just long enough for her to see the faintest glimmer of amusement. Or was it disappointment? He turned back toward his office without another word. Maggie exhaled shakily, clutching her phone as if it might explain her life choices. Her co-worker, Brian, wheeled his chair closer, whispering, "You just texted Olympus. Girl, don't," she hissed. "Oh, come on. It's not that bad. You called him a Greek god? That's kind of a compliment." She buried her face in her hands. "Tell that to HR when they draft my farewell email." The rest of the morning moved like a bad dream. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped. Every email notification felt like a warning bell. Her palms stayed clammy. When the team gathered for the weekly update, Maggie sat as far from Ethan as possible, praying the floor would develop sudden compassion and swallow her whole. He entered the room right on time, crisp and composed, holding a thin tablet instead of paper notes. He never raised his voice, never fumbled, never looked uncertain. That was the thing about Ethan. He was predictable in the way gravity was predictable. "Good morning," he began, scanning the room. "I hope everyone had a restful weekend." The only sound was the collective shuffle of guilt from every person who had already read Maggie's message. His gaze moved slowly across the faces until, for a fraction of a second, it landed on her. Not long enough to call attention to it, but long enough for her throat to tighten. Then he continued as if nothing at all had happened. Client updates, timelines, deliverables. Everything perfectly ordinary, except Maggie couldn't hear a word. Her mind kept replaying the scene, her thumb pressing send. The ridiculous phrasing swallowed a rule book. By the time the meeting ended, her nerves were a live wire. She waited until everyone had filed out before standing. Her chair squeaked loudly, announcing her panic to the empty room. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan still at the far end, closing his tablet, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. He didn't say a word, just nodded once and walked away. That small, silent acknowledgement felt worse than any reprimand. Back at her desk, Maggie sank into her chair, replaying every possible outcome. Maybe he'd laugh it off. Maybe HR would send a friendly reminder about professionalism. Or maybe her stomach twisted. Maybe he'd call her in later, expression unreadable, and end her career with a polite smile. The rest of the office hummed on, oblivious to the existential crisis happening in Cubicle 4B. A coffee mug clinked. Someone's ringtone played a bit of Springsteen. Life went on. By noon, the tension had settled into her shoulders like a weight she couldn't shake off. She tried to focus on her project, a draft proposal for the upcoming Ohio campaign, but the words blurred on the screen. Every line she wrote sounded like an apology in disguise. At 12:47, a soft chime broke her concentration. A new email appeared in her inbox. From Ethan Cole, subject Ohio campaign, team assignment. Her pulse kicked. She clicked it open. "Maggie, I'd like you to take the lead on the client presentation this Thursday. We'll discuss your approach at 9 tomorrow. E.C." She blinked, reading it twice. No mention of the text. No thinly veiled reprimand. Just trust or punishment disguised as responsibility. "Lead the presentation," she whispered. She. He's either forgiving or plotting my slow, professional death. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, a strange mix of dread and curiosity swirling in her chest. Outside the window, clouds drifted over the Portland skyline, turning the sunlight soft and uncertain. Maggie rubbed her temples again, a small, helpless laugh escaping her lips. Maybe this was it, the moment her quiet, predictable career started to unravel. Her phone buzzed once more. A final notification blinked across the screen, confirming what she already knew. Seen by Ethan Cole. And just like that, the day stopped feeling ordinary. The morning after never really waited. It just arrived too bright, too ordinary, pretending nothing had happened. But Maggie could feel it the moment she stepped into the elevator. A silence that wasn't silence. A a stillness that held whispers underneath. The doors slid open to the 10th floor. Conversation softened as she walked by, then picked up again in hurried tones once she passed. Keyboard clicks came slower today. Coffee spoons stirred quieter. She forced a smile at the receptionist, who gave her one back too wide, too sympathetic. The kind that said, "You poor thing," at her desk. The light from the window landed across her monitor in long, sharp stripes. Her phone vibrated once, twice. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. She knew what the messages would say. Variations of, "Are you okay?" and "Did he fire you?" Yet Maggie straightened a stack of reports, pretending she didn't feel the eyes. The laughter that stopped midair when she entered the break room. The kind of pity reserved for someone walking toward their own execution. And then there was him. Ethan Cole walked through the office just after 9, his footsteps steady, his expression unreadable. Navy suit, dark tie, that effortless calm that made her want to scream and admire him at the same time. He nodded at a few employees, stopped to check a file, then continued on to his office without even glancing her way. That silence cut deeper than anger. She would have preferred a storm, a slammed door, a sharp remark, anything but this perfect and polite nothing. The absence of reaction felt heavier than judgment. Her coffee had gone cold by the time HR called. The email subject line, "Please come to my office at your earliest convenience," might as well have read Judgment Day. She took a slow breath, gathered what dignity she had left, and walked down the hall. The HR office smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and fear. Linda from HR offered a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Maggie, please have a seat." Maggie did. Her palms were damp. The seconds stretched. Then the door opened. Ethan stepped in, no warning, no knock, no emotion. He took the chair beside Linda's desk, folding his hands calmly. "Good morning," he said. The words were ordinary, but they carried the quiet authority that made her heart trip over itself. Linda cleared her throat. "We just wanted to discuss the message sent yesterday to the company chat. As you know, communication standards." Ethan raised a hand gently. "It's fine, Linda." She stopped mid-sentence. Maggie blinked. He turned to her. No disciplinary action. His tone was level, almost kind. "We all make observations." The room went still. Linda looked confused, but said nothing. Ethan stood, smoothing the sleeve of his jacket. "If that's all, I'll handle it from here." When the door closed behind them, Maggie felt her breath return in slow, cautious pieces. He walked ahead toward his office, the sound of his shoes echoing against the tile. She followed, because what else could she do? Inside, the air felt colder. Minimalist furniture. Everything in clean lines and perfect order. No photographs, no clutter. Just one small plant by the window, a brave spot of green in all that glass and steel. He turned, gesturing lightly toward a chair. "Sit. Please." She obeyed, heart still hammering. He studied her for a moment, not unkindly, just observant, like he was trying to read what she wouldn't say. "Do you always speak so honestly, Ms. Thornton?" She almost smiled. "Only when I think no one's listening." His mouth twitched, maybe a hint of amusement, maybe not. That's the problem with technology. It listens too well. I didn't mean... He lifted a hand, stopping her apology before it began. "I know, but you were right about one thing." She blinked. "Which thing?" He looked toward the window, the city reflected in the glass, the rule book. That caught her off guard. He continued quietly. "I follow it too closely sometimes." He turned back to her, expression unreadable again. "Perhaps it's time I didn't." The admission, small, human, hung in the air like something fragile. Then, as if shifting gears, he added, "You're leading the Ohio campaign pitch this week." She blinked again. What you're capable, detail-oriented. You'll work under my supervision until the presentation." The words landed one by one, like stones sinking into water. She could barely process them. "You're assigning me a project I am?" "After what happened?" He gave a soft shrug. "You've already proven you can get the team's attention." Maggie stared at him, half convinced this was some elaborate test. "Are you sure this isn't punishment?" A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Humor, maybe, or challenge. "That depends," he said. "Do you see growth as punishment?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The man had just turned a workplace disaster into a philosophy lesson. "I expect your first outline by tomorrow morning," he added, his tone shifting back to business. "You're dismissed." She stood slowly, gripping her notepad like a shield. As she reached the door, she hesitated. "Mr. Cole?" He looked up. "Why me?" He paused for a moment, gaze steady. "Because you speak your mind. That's rare here." She left before he could see the flush rise in her cheeks. Back at her desk, the whispers had softened into curiosity. Someone had already noticed the new project email. Her name beside his. The office hummed again, but differently now, less pity, more intrigue. She dropped into her chair, staring at her reflection in the monitor's black screen. Maybe he wanted to teach her a lesson, or maybe she bit her lip, almost laughing at herself. Maybe he just wanted to watch her squirm. Outside, the afternoon light broke through the clouds, warm against the glass. She sat there for a long time, the corners of her mouth twitching between dread and wonder. Whatever this was, it was no longer just about a text message. Something had shifted quietly, invisibly, but enough to make her heart beat in unfamiliar ways. And deep down, Maggie knew this was only the beginning. The light in Ethan Cole's office was too clean to be comfortable. Morning sun spilled through floor-to-ceiling glass, bright enough to show every reflection, but too sharp to reveal what hid behind them. Maggie hesitated at the door, clutching her notebook like a peace offering. Her reflection floated on the glass wall, small, nervous, out of place. She inhaled once, squared her shoulders, and knocked. "Come in." His voice said low, even the kind of tone that didn't need to raise itself to be obeyed. She stepped inside. Everything about the room seemed intentional. No clutter, no paper piles, just a desk, a sleek computer, a single pen placed perfectly parallel to the edge. Even the air smelled organized. Ethan looked up briefly. "Right on time? Wouldn't want to test your rulebook again?" she said before she could stop herself. One corner of his mouth twitched. "Ah, yes," he murmured, leaning back slightly. The infamous rulebook, and the Greek god comment. Maggie's stomach dropped. "I was hoping we could pretend that part didn't exist." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing just a little. "It's difficult to ignore when it's archived in the company chat." She swallowed. "You could have fired me for that." "I could have," he said calmly. Then, almost teasing, "But I'm rather curious about the literary comparison. Greek god, which one were you thinking?" Her mouth opened, closed. "The embarrassed one." He laughed softly. The sound was unexpected warm, but restrained, like a window opening in a too-still room. "That's not in the pantheon, Ms. Thornton." She set her notebook on the desk, trying to reclaim dignity. "Look, it was a bad morning. I was venting. It wasn't meant for you or anyone here. Really? Honesty seems to be a habit for you." "It's cheaper than therapy," she replied. Deadpan? Something flickered in his gaze, amusement. Maybe admiration, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Therapy might still be advisable, especially if you continue working under me." Her eyebrows lifted. "Is that an official HR recommendation?" He ignored the jab, tapping his pen lightly on the desk. "Tell me, Ms. Thornton, when you wrote that message, was it frustration or observation?" She hesitated, caught between pride and caution. "Both." "Interesting. You want me to lie?" "No." He smiled faintly. "That's the last thing I need more of." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was alive. the quiet kind that makes two people too aware of themselves. Outside, the city murmured cars below, a siren far off, the hum of something ordinary. Ethan broke it first. You've reviewed the Ohio campaign brief twice. Thoughts? She flipped open her notebook, relieved to retreat to familiar ground. It's solid, but the messaging feels corporate, cold. The client wants connection. You can't sell sincerity in bullet points. He looked at her, one eyebrow lifting. You think I'm cold? That's not what I said. It's what you implied. She sighed. You're disciplined, Mr. Cole, which is admirable. But people don't buy discipline. They buy stories, emotion, maybe even imperfection. He studied her for a long moment, pen now motionless in his hand. You're suggesting we loosen our professional image. I'm suggesting we sound human. He leaned back again, eyes thoughtful. The glass wall behind him reflected the skyline gray clouds drifting over Portland's rooftops. For the first time, she noticed how tired he looked around the edges. Not weak, just worn. The kind of fatigue that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much control for too long. When he finally spoke, his tone had softened. Do you always challenge authority this openly? Only when authority asks for my opinion. He nodded slowly, almost approving. Good. Then I'm asking? The compliment, or whatever it was, caught her off guard. She met his eyes. Steady this time. Then I'll give you my best work. Just try not to make it harder than it already is. I'll take that under advisement. He stood, walking toward the window. From there, his reflection merged with the skyline, a man built of glass and light. You know, he said quietly, I don't remember the last time someone spoke to me without filtering first. She frowned, filtering, polishing their words to sound agreeable, avoiding offense, saying what they think I want to hear. Well, she said, standing too. I'm bad at pretending. I noticed. Their eyes met again, and for a breath, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, maybe wrapped in irritation. Two opposites recognizing something familiar in the other. He turned back to his desk. Breaking the moment, you'll have creative control for the Ohio presentation. But I'll be overseeing everything, so you're still keeping me on a leash. He looked at her directly. Call it supervision. She smiled faintly. Of course. As she gathered her notes, he added, Ms. Thornton. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said, his tone quieter now. You were half right. About what the Greek god part. Her laugh escaped before she could stop at a small, startled sound. You just proved the arrogant part. He didn't deny it, just smiled, the rare, subtle kind that barely reached his eyes. Then we're even. She left the office with her pulse still unsteady, the air in the hallway somehow warmer than when she'd entered. Behind her. Ethan watched the door close, his expression unreadable. He picked up the pen again. Though he didn't write, for a moment, the silence in the room pressed close. He thought about her tone, half nerve, half honesty, and the way she hadn't backed down. Everyone else in his orbit bowed to efficiency, to appearances. But she'd looked straight at him and called him out, not cruelly, just truthfully. He admired that, more than he should. When he finally looked back at the campaign files, the words blurred. Discipline, procedure, control. All the things he'd built his world on suddenly felt fragile. Maybe that was why, when he scheduled the next project review, he wrote her name at the top of the list, not to punish, not to test obedience, to see if honesty could really survive in his world of polished lies, and somewhere deep inside, though he'd never admit it out loud. Ethan Cole smiled to himself, curious, uneasy, and a little more human than he'd been the day before. The Friday air smelled faintly of rain and printer ink. Maggie stood beside her desk, staring at the travel memo like it might rewrite itself. Maple Ridge, Ohio, population small, Wi-Fi questionable, duration 1 week. She blinked again. One line at the bottom sealed her fate. Project leads, Ethan Cole and Maggie Thornton. Her stomach gave a slow, theatrical roll. Forced proximity with the man she had once publicly described as a Greek god with a stick up his spine. Perfect. Across the office, Ethan emerged from his glass fortress, calm as ever, a travel mug in one hand and his phone in the other. When his gaze lifted briefly, their eyes met. His nod was polite, professional, as if nothing at all was strange about spending 7 days in the same small-town hotel. She managed a tight smile. Ohio, that'll be, nice. He paused beside her desk. I'm told it's peaceful. Peaceful's another word for nowhere. He almost smiled. Then it should be quiet enough for you to think. Dangerous offer, Mr. Cole. You might not like what I think. I rarely do. And with that, he walked away, leaving her both flustered and grudgingly amused. By Monday morning, she was standing in front of her apartment door with a suitcase that refused to close. She knelt on it, pressing with both knees, muttering threats under her breath. You're going to Ohio, not Mars. You do not need 4 pairs of shoes. The zipper screamed in protest. She zipped anyway. When the black sedan pulled up, Ethan was already inside, reading something on his tablet. His luggage, a sleek black carry-on, sat neatly on the seat beside him. One bag, just one. She wrestled her suitcase into the trunk, muttering, minimalist show-off. What was that? He asked without looking up. Just admiring your efficiency. He glanced up then, eyes flicking to her tote bag, her overstuffed purse, and the coffee she was trying not to spill. You packed for a week or relocation. Preparation is a virtue, she said primly. Climbing in, so is restraint. She turned toward the window, pretending to focus on the passing streets. But she could feel him beside her, the faint scent of cedar cologne, the quiet rhythm of his breath, the weight of his calm filling the car. It should have been easier not to notice him. It wasn't. The drive stretched into long miles of gray highway and green blur. Oregon slipped behind them. The map dots of small towns passed by like half-forgotten dreams. Maggie tapped her pen against her notebook, filling silence with small sounds. Do you ever stop thinking, he asked suddenly. Do you ever stop watching? He looked over, one eyebrow raised, only when people stop fidgeting. She crossed her arms. You're not much of a road trip talker, are you? I prefer quiet. Of course you do. Minutes passed. The hum of tires on asphalt became a lullaby. Rain began to patter lightly against the windshield. She tried to read, failed, and finally gave in. So, what's Maple Ridge like? Ever been? He shook his head. No. Small town. Agricultural roots. The client's expanding their eco-brand facility there. It's a good story. Sustainability meets community revival. You rehearsed that, didn't you? I believe in knowing the details. You believe in control. He didn't answer. Outside, the rain thickened, streaking the glass. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just steady. Familiar, almost. Then she glanced at him and said, Can I ask something you usually do? Why me? You could have sent any senior specialist. Why drag along the woman who insulted you in a group chat? He didn't look at her. Maybe I wanted to see what else you'd say when you weren't hiding behind a screen. Her throat tightened. You're testing me. Maybe. She stared out at the rain-blurred road. Or maybe you just like having someone around who isn't afraid of you. The corner of his mouth lifted, barely there. That too. The tension in her chest eased just a little. When they stopped for gas outside Spokane, she stretched her legs beside the car, inhaling the sharp scent of wet pavement and coffee from a nearby diner. Ethan stood by the pump, rain misting his hair, posture as composed as if he were at a board meeting. You can actually relax. You know, she said, we're not being audited. He glanced at her, eyes softening. I don't relax. It's inefficient. She laughed. The sound surprised them both. Later, when they reached the small airport for their connecting flight, she noticed his single bag again, perfectly zipped, perfectly light. Her suitcase thudded onto the scale like a defiant child. The airline clerk blinked. "You're over the limit, ma'am." Ethan sighed, stepping forward. "Remove something unnecessary." She shot him a glare. "That's easy for Mr. One suitcase over here to say. Try starting with the extra pair of heels." "Absolutely not." He gave her that quiet, unamused look, the one that said he could wait all day. 10 minutes later, she was shoving shoes into her tote bag, muttering about tyranny in three-piece suits. When she finally sat beside him on the plane, disheveled and breathless, he said mildly, "Feel better." "Not really." He closed his laptop, turning toward the window. "Next time, I'll pack for you." She bit back a smile. "Over my dead body." He didn't respond, but she caught at the briefest glint of laughter in his eyes before he looked away. Hours later, when they arrived in Maple Ridge, the air smelled of soil and spring grass. The town was small, scattered with brick storefronts and hand-painted signs. People waved at strangers here. It unnerved her more than she wanted to admit. Their hotel sat on the edge of town, 2 stories tall, pale shutters, a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. Inside, the receptionist handed them adjoining keys. "Rooms 204 and 205, she said cheerfully, right next to each other. Of course they were. Maggie shot Ethan a look. He simply nodded, unbothered, already signing the forms with his perfect handwriting. In her room, she unpacked half her life onto the bedclothes, files, chargers, coffee packets. Next door, she could hear faint movement, his door closing softly, his routine efficient, precise. They were opposites in every way. She filled space with words. He emptied it with silence. And yet, somewhere between the overstuffed suitcase and the single carry-on, balance existed. That night, she sat by the small window, watching the town's lights fade one by one. The sound of crickets hummed through the quiet. She thought of his calm, his order, his impossible patience, and how, somehow, it didn't annoy her quite as much anymore. She closed her notebook, heart oddly restless. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was him. Through the thin wall, she heard the click of his lamp turning off. 2 rooms, 1 heartbeat apart, and for the first time, neither of them slept easily. The morning sky over Maple Ridge was a soft gray, the kind that promised rain before noon. Maggie stood by the rental car, coffee steaming in her hand, watching Ethan load the trunk with quiet precision. His movements were efficient, almost graceful. He didn't fumble, didn't rush. He just was steady, composed, untouchable. She hated that it impressed her. She slid into the passenger seat, tucking her jacket around her knees. The faint scent of leather and cologne filled the small space. He started the engine, windshield wipers giving a single lazy swipe. For a while, there was only the hum of the road. The silence wasn't awkward, just careful. Raindrops began to trace lines down the glass. She watched them merge and slide, each one a tiny escape. He focused on the road, hands resting easily on the steering wheel, posture straight as a ruler. Maggie toyed with her coffee lid. "So," she said finally, "are you always this talkative on long drives?" He didn't look over. "Only when I have something worth saying." She smirked. "That's a polite way of telling me to be quiet. I didn't say that. You thought it—" He sighed softly. "Possibly." The wipers swished again. They passed a stretch of fields, flat and endless, where fog curled low across the ground. Maggie glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "You ever get tired of being so contained?" He frowned. "Contained. You know. Polished. Controlled. Like you swallowed a manual on how not to feel things." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You're still quoting your text." Guess I'm consistent. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, control keeps people from falling apart. Sometimes falling apart is how you find what's real, she said. The words surprised her. Maybe him too. A beat of silence. Then, what's real for you? Maggie. Her throat tightened around the question. She looked down at her coffee, now cold. My dad used to take me on road trips, she said softly. We'd drive for hours. He'd sing off key to Springsteen and tell me bad jokes about traffic lights. After he passed, I tried taking one alone. It just wasn't the same. Too quiet. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened, the kind of listening that felt rare, unhurried. When he spoke, his voice was low. When did he pass? 10 years ago. Heart attack. 1 minute he was fine, the next, gone. She traced a raindrop on the window with her fingertip. He was the kind of person who filled silence without words. You know, just by being there. Ethan nodded, eyes still on the road. My father's the opposite. He fills silence with expectation. She glanced at him, surprised by the admission. He was military. Discipline was his language. My brother learned it well. I didn't. Her voice softened. You said he's still alive? We just don't talk. The air in the car thickened, not with awkwardness, but something heavier truth shared between two guarded people. Outside, the rain picked up. Windshield wipers moved faster, steady, rhythmic. After a while, Maggie reached for her phone. You mind, she asked? He shook his head. She scrolled through her playlist until she found it. Springsteen's I'm on Fire. The guitar hum filled the small car, warm and familiar. Ethan's hand tightened just slightly on the wheel. My mother used to play this. Mine too, she said. Guess it's universal therapy. They listened. The rain softened, syncing with the slow beat of the song. For a few miles, the road became something else, a thin ribbon pulling two separate lives into the same quiet rhythm. Maggie leaned her head against the window, voice low. You ever think about how songs outlive people? Yes, he said, and how some people never really leave. They just change form. She turned to look at him. The faint reflection of the dashboard lights shimmered across his face, gentle lines, tired eyes. A calm he'd built like armor. But in that moment, he looked almost human. You surprise me, Mr. Cole. Is that good or bad? I'll let you know when I figure it out. He smiled, barely, the kind of smile that didn't need to be seen to be felt. They drove another hour before the rain thickened into a curtain. Thunder rolled far off, deep and steady. Then came the sound, sharp, metallic, followed by a jolt. Great, she muttered. That's not thunder. He pulled over, hazard lights blinking against the gray. The right rear tire sagged flat. He stepped out first, rain soaking his shoulders within seconds. Maggie followed, clutching her jacket overhead. I told you we should have taken the SUV, she said. You also told me to stop being boring, he replied, crouching beside the tire. Apparently, excitement comes with consequences. She laughed, half from nerves, half from absurdity. Do you even know how to change a tire? He shot her a look. Of course. Good. Because I don't. He worked in silence, rain dripping down his face. The scene would have been miserable mud, thunder, and the smell of wet asphalt if not for the ridiculous sight of Ethan Cole, CEO, kneeling in puddles, sleeves rolled up, hair plastered to his forehead. Maggie couldn't help it. She started laughing. He glanced up, squinting through the rain. Something funny. Just she doubled over, clutching her stomach. You look like you lost a bet with the weather. A drop of rain slid down his nose. I'm glad my suffering amuses you. It really does. He stood, wiping his hands on his jacket, completely drenched. She offered him a small towel from the glove compartment, pink, patterned with cartoon flamingos. He stared at it. Of course you have this. Don't judge the flamingos. They're survivors. For the first time, he laughed. Not polite, not restrained. A real, unguarded laugh. The kind that shook the edges off his perfect composure. Rain fell harder, soaking them both. Maggie's hair stuck to her cheeks. Water trickled down her neck. She should have been cold, miserable, but she wasn't. Ethan looked at her, still smiling. "You're impossible." "Thank you," she said, half breathless. They stood there for a beat, the storm around them muffled by something quieter, something almost tender. The air smelled of wet earth and something new. He glanced away first, clearing his throat. "We should get back in the car before we drown." Agreed. Back inside. The heater hummed softly. Their clothes steamed in the warmth, the windows fogged, blurring the world outside. Maggie watched a raindrop roll down the glass, her reflection beside his two figures outlined by the storm's dim light. She smiled faintly. "You know, for someone who follows the rule book, you handle chaos pretty well." He looked at her, eyes softer than before. "Maybe I just needed a better teacher." The road stretched ahead, dark and glistening, but something in the car felt lighter now, like the rain had washed away more than just mud. She turned up the radio. Another Springsteen song began, and somewhere between laughter and thunder, something unspoken began to shift. Neither of them said it, but both felt it, and outside, the rain kept falling steady, endless, forgiving. By the time they reached the edge of Maple Ridge, the rain had turned wild. The kind that didn't fall, it attacked. Sheets of water whipped against the windshield, thunder rolling across the flat fields like drums. The wipers worked furiously, but the road was disappearing into gray. Ethan leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Visibility's dropping. We should pull over." Maggie squinted through the blur. "There's a sign, something about a motel." He slowed, following the flicker of a neon light barely visible through the storm. The Blue Haven Inn. The name promised more comfort than reality could deliver. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. A tired clerk behind the counter offered a sheepish smile. "You folks are lucky. One room left. Power's been flickering, but it's dry and warm." "One room," Maggie repeated. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We'll take it." She started to protest, but he'd already pulled out his credit card. The clerk slid over a brass key with a frayed tassel. Room 7. The room was small, a soft hum coming from an old radiator by the window. 2 twin beds, thin floral comforters, a wooden nightstand in between. Lightning flashed outside, bright enough to make the shadows jump. Maggie set her bag down, avoiding eye contact. "Well, romantic?" He glanced around, hanging his jacket carefully on the back of a chair. "It's shelter. You really know how to set the mood. I'm sure you'll survive one night, Ms. Thornton. Assuming you don't snore, Mr. Cole." He looked up. "I don't," she smiled. "Of course you don't." The lights flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the storm howled against the window, wind slipping through the tiny gaps in the frame. Maggie sat on the edge of her bed, running a towel through her damp hair. The quiet between thunderclaps was almost worse than the noise. Ethan stood near the desk, scrolling through his phone. No service. He frowned slightly, setting it aside. "So," she said, "no emails, no meetings, no control. How does that feel?" He looked at her, the hint of a smirk playing at his lips. "Unproductive, human." She corrected, "Debatable." They sat in the low light, the storm wrapping the world outside in sound. She leaned back against the wall, watching him as he removed his tie, rolled his sleeves. There was something strangely intimate about seeing him undone still neat, but softer somehow. He caught her glance. "Something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "Just surprising to see you without armor. Armor suit, tie, unreadable face. Your usual uniform?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to his suitcase and pulled out a plain t-shirt, turning slightly as he changed. That's when she saw it, a thin scar across his left shoulder, pale against his skin. It looked old, deliberate. Her voice was quiet. How'd that happen? He froze for half a second before pulling the shirt down. It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. Old mistake. She tilted her head. You don't seem like someone who makes many. Everyone does, he said. His voice clipped now. Some just leave reminders. The air shifted. She wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes warned her not to. So she didn't. Instead, she picked up her notebook, pretending to review notes for the next day's meeting. Minutes passed. The rain softened to a steady whisper, the thunder more distant now. Maggie spoke first. You ever notice how storms make everything sound closer? He looked at her, puzzled. The walls, the air, even silence. It's like it presses in, waiting for someone to break it. He studied her for a long moment. You don't like silence I used to. Now it feels like a mirror I don't want to look into. He nodded slowly. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. Her breath caught. He'd said it like he meant it. They didn't speak for a while after that. The lamp flickered again, dimming to a faint golden glow. The room felt suspended, like the world outside had disappeared entirely. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Maggie watched him quietly the way his shoulders rose and fell, the tension that never really left his body. She wondered what it cost him to always be composed, and he, though he didn't show it, could feel her gaze. It unsettled him. She saw too much past the CEO, past the surface. She sees too much. I can't let her. But he didn't move away. When the lights finally gave out, it wasn't dramatic, just a soft pop and then darkness. Maggie's startled laugh filled the room. Well, there goes civilization. Stay where you are, he said, his voice somewhere near the window. I'm not 5. Ethan, I can handle the dark. Still. She froze when thunder cracked. Closer this time. A faint scrape of metal sounded as he found a small emergency candle on the nightstand and lit it with a match from his pocket. The flicker spread across the room, gold and fragile. It painted him in soft light. The lines of his face gentler now. Shadows danced across the walls. He set the candle between them, the small flame bridging the space like a heartbeat. They sat across from each other, both pretending to focus on nothing. Maggie traced the rim of her coffee mug, whispering, You ever think life forces people together just to see what they'll do? He met her eyes. And what do you think we'll do? She smiled faintly. Try not to make a mess of it. His expression softened, something unreadable flickering behind his calm. You might be right. Lightning flashed again, flooding the room with white before fading back to amber. The candle wavered. Their shadows shifted closer on the wall. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain began to slow, each drop landing softer, steadier, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. And inside, in that dim motel room, 2 twin beds apart, but one small flame between them. They both knew something fragile had begun to change. Neither of them could name it yet, but neither wanted to look away. The storm passed sometime before dawn. When Maggie woke, the air in the small motel room was still damp, carrying the scent of rain and something faintly metallic, like the world had been rinsed clean. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan that turned lazily above her, its rhythm matching her thoughts. 2 twin beds, a shared candle burned to a stub, and silence that no longer felt heavy, just quiet. Ethan was already up. She heard the soft scrape of the door closing, footsteps fading down the hall. She sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and smiled to herself. He probably couldn't start the day without coffee or control. When she found him, he was in the motel diner, sitting by the window. The light outside was gray and soft, the kind that turns puddles into silver. He had a cup of black coffee in front of him, steam curling into the air like a ghost. He looked different in the morning, less armor, more human. She slid into the booth across from him. Morning. He looked up, eyes calm but not cold. "Sleep well. I've had worse nights," she said. The thunder was actually kind of soothing. He smiled faintly. "You're the first person I've met who calls thunder soothing. I like honesty with noise." She paused, watching him stir his coffee even though he didn't add sugar. "You don't, do you?" He looked out the window. I'm not sure I remember what quiet honesty sounds like anymore. Something in his tone made her chest tighten. There was a weight there, not his usual composed silence, but something deeper, like the residue of a memory that still ached. She didn't push, just waited. The waitress came by, filled her cup, smiled politely, and left them to their small island of stillness. Ethan's gaze stayed on the rain-streaked glass. "My brother used to love mornings like this," he said finally, "the kind that smell like second chances." She didn't move. "Used to." He nodded once, eyes still distant. "He died 5 years ago. Car accident, late at night, too much rain, too much." His voice faltered for a second. "Too much everything." Maggie's hand tightened around her cup. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "You don't need to be. I was supposed to pick him up that night. I'd been working late. One more email, one more client call. By the time I got there, it was already done." The words came evenly, but his jaw tightened with each one. She didn't interrupt. The silence between them held steady, like a thread stretched but unbroken. "I got engaged a few months later," he went on, voice quieter now. "I think I thought love could fix guilt." She stayed for a while. Then one morning, she left. Said I was living in a house full of ghosts. Maggie let out a slow breath. Maybe she couldn't see the difference between ghosts and grief. He looked at her then. Really looked. There was no defense in his eyes. No control, just the soft ache of someone remembering what it meant to be seen. "What about you?" he asked. "You talk like someone who's lived through a few storms yourself." She smiled faintly, tracing the rim of her cup. "My storms are quieter, slower." She took a sip of coffee. Let the warmth steady her. "I used to work at a PR agency in New York. My dream job. Fast, glamorous. All that noise you think means success." He waited. "My mom got sick. Alzheimer's. I flew home to help for a few weeks. Weeks turned into months. Then, she didn't remember who I was anymore." Her voice thinned, but she didn't look away. "I quit. Everyone said I'd regret it. I didn't." The diner clock ticked softly behind them. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. "I spent 2 years helping her dress, eat, remember. Some days she called me the nice nurse. Some days she didn't call me anything at all. She smiled, small and real. When she passed, I thought I'd feel lost, but I think I'd already said goodbye 100 times before." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You did the right thing." She looked at him. "You don't even believe in right or wrong when it comes to people. You believe in control." He gave a soft huff of laughter. "Maybe you're right." He paused. "But I know integrity when I see it." The words landed deeper than she expected. She looked down at her coffee, suddenly unsure of what to do with her hands, or her heart. The waitress returned, refilled their cups, left them again. The diner was mostly empty now, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of tires passing on wet pavement. Maggie studied the raindrops racing each other down the window. "You ever think about what people would say if they saw us right now?" He arched an eyebrow. "That the CEO and his employee are having an inappropriate breakfast meeting." "Exactly." He smiled. "Let them think what they want." "That's new," she teased. "You usually care about appearances. Maybe I'm learning. From me." He met her eyes again. Possibly. The air between them felt different now, not charged, not dangerous, just alive. Maggie leaned back, her fingers curling around her mug. "You know, for someone who doesn't talk much, you've said more this morning than I've heard you say in a month." I must be sleep-deprived or human. He chuckled under his breath. You really don't let go of that, do you? Nope. Not until you prove me wrong. Ethan's gaze softened. Maybe that's why you're here. To make me remember? Her heart caught at that. Not the words themselves, but the way he said them, quiet, unguarded. Outside. A beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, laying a thin golden line across the table. She looked at it, then at him, and something inside her shifted. He wasn't just the boss anymore, not the man she'd once mocked from behind a screen. He was just Ethan, flawed, tired, trying, and for the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to know him without the armor. He cleared his throat softly, breaking the silence. We should get on the road soon. The client meeting's at 2. She nodded, gathering her things. But before she stood, she said quietly, for what it's worth, I don't think ghosts stay because they're angry. They stay because someone still cares enough to remember. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. Then, I guess my brother's still here. She smiled. Sounds like it. As they left the diner, the doorbell jingled above them. The rain had stopped completely now. The sky was brighter, washed clean. The air filled with that sweet after-storm calm. He held the door open for her, and for a fleeting second, their hands brushed. Neither of them pulled away too quickly. And as they stepped into the sunlight, both knew something invisible had shifted between them. Not enough to name, but enough to feel. The rain in Portland had a way of falling softly, like it understood something about regret. By the time they returned from Ohio, the storm had followed them home, thin streaks of water gliding down the glass walls of Harrison and Cole. But no one minded the weather. The pitch had gone perfectly. Clients had shaken hands, numbers looked good, and even Ethan stoic. Careful, Ethan had smiled in public. The celebration came naturally. Someone ordered wine. Someone else suggested the rooftop bar overlooking the city. And suddenly, Maggie found herself surrounded by laughter and the clinking of glasses, her cheeks warm from the first sip of red. Ethan stood a few feet away, listening more than talking. He wasn't a man who blended into a crowd. Even when he tried to, the city lights behind him made his profile sharp, edges softened by exhaustion. She caught herself watching him too long, then looked away, pretending to care about a story she wasn't really hearing. When he finally approached her, it was with a quiet nod. "Good work today," he said. She smiled. "You mean for not getting us fired? I mean for pulling off what most people thought couldn't be done." His tone was genuine, and it disarmed her more than a joke would have. "You don't hand out compliments easily, do you? I save them for when they matter." Something in his eyes lingered a beat too long. She looked away first, heart tapping against her ribs in a rhythm she couldn't quite steady. Later, when the group began to thin, rides called, laughter fading into the night, he offered to walk her down. The elevator doors closed around them with a quiet hiss. Just the two of them, a bottle of wine's worth of warmth between them. For a while, neither spoke. The hum of the elevator filled the space like a held breath. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the glowing floor numbers, but his reflection in the metal door betrayed him, tense shoulders, parted lips. A man caught between sense and something stronger. She broke the silence first, voice soft. "It's strange, isn't it? How easy it is to forget the lines when things start to feel normal." He turned to her. "You think this feels normal?" Her laugh was quiet. Maybe not normal, just human. The elevator slowed, lights dimming slightly as it stopped between floors. A mechanical pause. She looked up at him, ready to joke about Portland elevators and bad timing, but the words never came. He was watching her, really watching, the way people do when they've stopped trying not to. She felt her breath catch. "Ethan?" He stepped closer, so close she could smell the faint trace of rain on his coat. The space between them narrowed, and for a heartbeat, She thought he would move away. Instead, he kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't careful. It was quiet and desperate and alive, the kind of kiss that says I shouldn't, but I can't stop. For a moment, everything in her stilled. The hum of the elevator, the city outside, her own heartbeat, all of it disappeared. There was only the warmth of his hand at her jaw, the soft press of his mouth against hers, and the sudden, dangerous realization that she didn't want it to stop. And then he pulled back. It was instant, sharp, like waking from a dream too soon. His breath came unsteady. His eyes, those measured, disciplined eyes, were already retreating. This was a mistake, he said quietly. The words hit harder than any slap could. She blinked, lips still tingling, trying to find something to say. Anything that wouldn't sound like breaking. Right, she managed. A mistake. The elevator resumed its slow descent, the hum returning, the lights steady again. They stood side by side, not touching, not breathing the same air. Just two people suddenly reminded of every invisible line between them. When the doors opened on the lobby, Maggie stepped out first. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, steady and measured. She didn't look back. Outside, the air was cool and wet. She let it hit her face, washing away the heat in her cheeks. Around her, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Cars splashing through puddles, a woman laughing under an umbrella, a man singing softly to himself as he waited for the light to change. Ordinary life continuing as if her heart hadn't just stumbled. She walked toward the street, each step both grounding and hollow. Her reflection followed her in the rain-streaked windows, hair slightly tousled, eyes too bright. If honesty had brought her here, maybe silence would get her out. The thought came quietly, like a whisper she didn't want to hear but couldn't ignore. She stopped under the awning of a cafe, looking out at the rain. She wanted to be angry, but mostly she just felt tired. Behind her, the elevator doors opened again. She didn't turn, but she knew it was him. She could feel his presence before he spoke. "Maggie, don't." Her voice was soft, steady. "You already said enough." He hesitated, the kind of pause that carries 100 unspoken apologies. She waited for one of them to make this moment less unbearable, but none came. When she finally looked at him, he looked smaller somehow, not in stature but in certainty. The man who had always known what to say now had nothing left that would make sense. She gave him a small, quiet smile, dignity wrapped in ache. "Good night, Mr. Cole." And with that, she turned and walked into the rain. The drops were cold, but she didn't hurry. She let them soak into her hair, her jacket, her bones, each step softened by water and streetlight. The city blurred into streaks of gold and gray. Behind her, the glass doors closed with a hush. He stood there a moment longer, watching through the reflection of his own face. His hand brushed his mouth, as if to erase the proof. Then he looked down, whispered something only the rain could hear, and disappeared back inside. Maggie kept walking until the ache in her chest became rhythm, until the city's heartbeat drowned out her own. When she reached her car, she leaned against the door and exhaled, eyes closed. For a second, she almost laughed. Of course it ended like this. Not with drama, not with a fight. Just two people too afraid of what they felt and too honest to pretend they didn't. She started the engine, headlights slicing through the rain. The road shimmered ahead, slick and uncertain. Somewhere between the echo of his words and the sound of her own heartbeat, she decided, tomorrow, she'd go to work, she'd do her job, she'd be fine. But tonight, she'd let herself feel the silence. Because sometimes silence said what words couldn't. And outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless like forgiveness that neither of them knew how to ask for. Monday arrived with the sound of rain tapping against the windows of Harrison and Cole, soft and steady, like it knew exactly where it had left them. Maggie walked in early, coffee in hand, her reflection ghosting beside her in the elevator doors. She looked composed, enough hair neat, eyes steady, mouth calm. Only her heartbeat betrayed her. The office felt colder somehow. Or maybe she'd just forgotten how silence could hum when two people were pretending it wasn't there. Ethan was already in his office when she passed by. His blinds were half closed, light from his monitor washing the glass in pale blue. She didn't slow down, didn't look in. He didn't either. Still. She felt at the awareness that buzzed between them like static electricity before a storm. By 9, whispers had already started. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. A sideways glance near the copier, a too long pause at the coffee machine. Someone muttered something about tension, another about chemistry. Maggie smiled when necessary, nodded when expected, and buried herself in spreadsheets that no longer seemed to make sense. Her coffee grew cold before she drank half of it. Across the glass walls, Ethan kept to his corner, sharp as ever, precise as always. His calendar was full, his tone professional, his control immaculate. But every now and then between meetings, between breaths, his eyes would drift toward the PR floor, as if pulled there by something he wasn't ready to admit. Maggie noticed the smallest things. How his emails were shorter now. How he no longer called her by her first name in meetings. How the space between them had become both safety and punishment. By noon, the air was thick with unspoken things. She stayed late, pretending to organize client files. Around her, the office emptied one person at a time until only the hum of fluorescent lights remained. She was sliding papers into folders when a faint knock came at her desk. A hand reached into view, Ethan's hand setting a cup of coffee beside her. "Left over from downstairs," he said, voice quiet, careful. "You looked like you could use it." She didn't look up. "Thanks. You didn't have to." "I know." He lingered for a moment, the kind of pause that carried 1,000 unsaid words, then walked away. When she finally glanced at the cup, she noticed it wasn't her usual order. It was his, black, no sugar, and written in faint ink on the lid, his initials, a mistake maybe, or a reminder. The next morning, she found a folder on her desk before anyone else arrived, revised notes from the Ohio project, neatly labeled, no message, just the quiet proof that he'd been there before her. It continued like that all week, small gestures, silent sentences. She'd leave her pen near the edge of his desk during briefings, and somehow it would find its way back to her drawer by morning. His coffee mug would appear beside the communal machine just after she arrived, still faintly warm. No words, no eye contact, just presence, still. Something in her was unraveling. Her ideas, once sharp, bright, now came slower. Her notes grew shorter. Every word felt filtered through a fog she couldn't name. One afternoon, her colleague Tessa leaned over the cubicle wall. "You okay? You've been quieter lately." Maggie smiled. "Just tired. Big trip." "Huh." Tessa's voice was light but probing. "You and the boss bet that was something." Maggie kept her tone even. "It was work." "Of course," Tessa said. But her grin said she didn't believe it. When she turned back to her computer, Maggie exhaled, a small sigh that barely reached the air. Her screen blurred for a moment, numbers dissolving into nothing. She blinked until they made sense again. By the time Friday came, the distance between them had settled into something almost comfortable, like a wound scabbing over tender but less raw. She caught glimpses of him in meetings, his voice steady as ever, but his eyes, they lingered, just for a second too long, just enough to hurt. That evening, as the office lights dimmed, she stood by the window, watching the city bleed into twilight. Her reflection stared back, faint and ghostly over the skyline. Behind her, she heard his door open. He didn't speak at first, just walked closer, his footsteps quiet against the carpet. Maggie. Her name in his voice, it still had weight. She turned, careful to keep her expression neutral. "Mr. Cole." A pause. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "We're back to that." "Huh." It feels safer, she said softly. He looked down, hands in his pockets. I suppose it does. The silence stretched, fragile as glass. I wanted to say. He stopped. The words seemed to fight their way out. I shouldn't have what happened in the elevator. Don't, she cut in gently. You already said it was a mistake. Let's leave it there? He looked up then, eyes tired. You think that's easy for me? She smiled faintly. No, but I think it's necessary. A flicker of something crossed his face, regret, maybe, or recognition. You're right. He turned to leave, then hesitated, glancing back. You're good at what you do. Maggie, don't let this get in the way. She nodded once. I won't. He left without another word. The sound of his office door closing echoed through the room, too final, too soft. Maggie stood there for a long time, her coffee cold in her hands, her heart caught between relief and something heavier. She stared at the city lights until they blurred. Maybe this was what back to normal looked like. Two professionals pretending the world hadn't tilted. Two hearts pretending they hadn't noticed. As she packed her bag, her phone buzzed with a message from Tessa Drinks Tonight. Celebrate surviving another week. Maggie typed back. Rain check. She turned off the light at her desk and stepped into the hallway. The sound of her heels against the tile was soft, rhythmic. When she passed Ethan's office, she noticed the blinds were open for the first time all week. He wasn't there, but his jacket was draped over the chair, his mug still on the table, the same mug she had once teased him about for being too serious for color. She reached out, touched the handle. It was still warm. For a moment, she almost smiled. Then she let it go. The elevator doors closed behind her with a gentle sigh, carrying her down through the hum of the building, through the layers of things unsaid. Outside, the city was washed clean again. The air smelled like rain and endings. And somewhere in the quiet space between guilt and longing, two people tried to convince themselves that distance was safer than truth. But deep down, neither really believed it. It started with a photo, just one, grainy, taken from across a restaurant in Ohio, but clear enough to tell a story people wanted to believe. Ethan and Maggie sitting at a small corner table, candlelight catching between them, his hand resting near hers, her smile unmistakably soft. By Monday morning, the image had found its way into the bloodstream of the office first through whispers, then through Slack messages, then through an email that someone accidentally sent to the wrong department. By Tuesday, it had reached the company blog, then the investors, then HR. By Wednesday, it was everywhere. The office buzzed with low murmurs, half curiosity, half thrill. People lowered their voices when she entered the room. Some smiled too sweetly, others looked away. It was like walking through fog. Everyone could see her, but no one really looked at her anymore. Maggie kept her head high, though each step felt heavier. She still came in early, still typed her reports, still smiled when spoken to, but her hands trembled when she poured her coffee, and her reflection in the break room window didn't quite look like her anymore. At 10, HR called her in. Two people sat waiting, Kendra from HR and Ethan. He didn't look at her when she entered. The blinds were drawn, the air too still. Kendra began gently, voice careful. Maggie, there's been some chatter online, a photo from your business trip in Ohio. We just need to clarify the context. Maggie folded her hands in her lap. It was dinner, after the pitch, public restaurant, that's it, and the optics, Kendra said carefully, aren't ideal. Maggie glanced at Ethan then. He was seated straight, calm, every detail of him, tie, cufflinks, posture measured to the inch. But his jaw was tight, and his hands, she noticed, were clasped too hard. Kendra went on. We're fielding calls from two investors. They're asking about professionalism, boundaries. I understand, Maggie said quietly. If you need me to take responsibility for the photo, I will. Ethan's head turned slightly, but he didn't speak. Kendra hesitated. Responsibility. Maggie took a breath. Say it was me who blurred the lines, that I acted carelessly, that the company had nothing to do with it. A long silence followed, the kind that feels like a decision being made in real time. Finally, Ethan spoke, voice calm, distant. If that's what you think is best. Something in her chest cracked, soft but deep. Kendra nodded. All right. We'll release a short statement. Keep it internal for now. Maggie stood, thanked them, and walked out with her back straight. Her palms were cold, her throat tight, but she didn't look back. By lunch, the whispers had sharpened. She's lucky to still have a job. He must have shut it down fast. Classic office crush, poor thing. Maggie ate at her desk, eyes on the screen, pretending she couldn't hear them. She told herself it didn't matter, that she was stronger than this. But every word scraped against the part of her that still remembered how he'd kissed her like it meant something. That night, she walked out late. The lobby was quiet. Lights dimmed. The city outside smeared in gold and rain. She stopped when she saw him standing by the elevator. He looked tired, tie loosened, coat over his arm. For a second, neither moved. Rough day, she said finally, voice gentle. He nodded once. For both of us. She studied his face, the shadow beneath his eyes. You could have said something in there. He looked away. Anything I said would have made it worse. For the company, she said softly. He didn't deny it. Something like disappointment flickered across her face. Right. Maggie, no. It's fine. Her smile was small but steady. I made the choice. Remember? To protect the company. To protect you. The elevator dinged. She stepped in first. He followed, silent. The ride down felt endless. She watched the floor numbers glow, one by one. You know, she said finally. The thing about silence is it's easier to forgive words than the absence of them. He looked at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. When the doors opened, she walked out, not waiting for him this time. Her heels clicked against the marble, steady, unshaken. Outside, the night air smelled of rain again, sharp, cleansing, cruel. She didn't cry, not yet. But when she reached her car, her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from anger, but from the quiet understanding that she'd protected a man who couldn't protect her back. Inside the building, Ethan stood by the window overlooking the parking lot. He could see the faint reflection of her taillights as she drove away. He thought about the words he didn't say, the statement he didn't stop. His chest felt heavy, like something inside him had turned to stone. Protect the company, he told himself. That's your job. But somewhere beneath that thought, another voice whispered, protect the woman who made you feel human again. He closed his eyes, but the two voices kept fighting. That night, his inbox filled with congratulations from the board, praise for swift crisis management, for leadership under pressure. He stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then he clicked each message open, one by one, and deleted them all. The next morning, Maggie walked into work again. Her name still floated through whispers, though softer now, coated with pity instead of curiosity. No one made eye contact. Even Tessa avoided her, offering only a quiet hang in there before turning away. Ethan passed her in the hall, their shoulders nearly brushing. He said nothing, neither did she. But that small distance between them, it wasn't professional anymore. It was grief. She returned to her desk, sat down, and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat she couldn't steady. Across the glass. He stood in his office, watching her through the reflection he couldn't escape. The city outside began to rain again, soft and endless. And in the quiet rhythm of it, two people sat less than 50 feet apart, both pretending they hadn't broken something they didn't yet know how to fix. He told himself silence was safer, but deep down, he already knew it was the loudest mistake he'd ever made. The house was too quiet. Ethan hadn't noticed it before. The way silence echoes when there's no one left to fill it. His apartment, high above the Portland skyline, looked like a showroom more than a home, perfectly arranged, perfectly cold. The city lights stretched below like static, a blur of movement that never reached him. He loosened his tie, sat on the couch, and stared at the untouched dinner on the table. Another long day, another night spent avoiding the sound of his own thoughts. His phone buzzed, his mother's name glowing on the screen. For a moment, he considered letting it ring out, but old habits of courtesy won, and he answered, "Ethan, you sound exhausted," she said. Her voice was soft, worn by years, but still capable of cutting through his defenses. "I'm fine, Mom. Just working. You always are." He smiled faintly. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It is," she replied, without hesitation. "You hide behind work because it never leaves you." The words landed with more truth than he wanted to admit. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Work keeps me steady." "No," she said gently. "It keeps you safe. From people. From pain. From living." He didn't answer. The city hummed below him, and the silence between them deepened. "You used to laugh more," she said finally. "Do you remember?" "Not really. That's what I'm afraid of." He exhaled. "Slow? Mom." "I know," she interrupted softly. "You don't want to talk about it. You never do, but I can hear it in your voice. Ethan, something's broken, and you're pretending it isn't." The conversation lingered long after it ended. When he hung up, the apartment felt heavier. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, everything seemed too loud. He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, and stared at the reflection of himself in the glass. The suit, the neat hair, the face that looked nothing like the boy his mother remembered. He turned away, across the city, in an office that still smelled faintly of coffee and rain. Maggie Thornton placed a single white envelope on her desk. Her badge lay beside it, her hands steady, but her heart not. It wasn't a dramatic decision, just the quiet kind, the one you make after you've run out of reasons to stay. Her resignation letter was short, polite, professional, but the note beneath it, handwritten, wasn't, "You once told me we all make observations. Here's mine, you're human. Try living like it." She left her keys on the desk, took one last look around the office, and turned off the light. The air outside was crisp, sunlight catching on the rain-damp pavement. She took the long way home, walking past the bookstore where she used to stop on Fridays, the park where she'd once eaten lunch under the maple trees. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing did. By the time Ethan arrived the next morning, the office felt different. Something in the air had shifted, though no one could name it. HR had already processed her notice. Her desk was empty, no coffee cup, no post-it notes with half-finished ideas, just absence. He didn't realize it first. He went through meetings, nodded at numbers, signed contracts, routine his old shield. But when he reached for the morning report and found it missing, he noticed the blank space on her desk. It hit him like a soundless drop. "Where's Maggie?" he asked his assistant, voice sharper than intended. "She resigned," she said carefully. "Yesterday. Left a note." His stomach tightened. A note. She handed him the small envelope, his name written in her hand, steady, familiar. He hesitated before opening it. When he read the words, he went very still. "You once told me we all make observations. Here's mine, you're human. Try living like it." He read it twice, 3 times, then again. Something in his chest cracked, the kind of fracture you don't notice until it starts to ache. He sat down, the note still open in his hand. Around him, the office buzzed with ordinary life phones ringing, printers humming, voices trading polite greetings. But for the first time, he couldn't hear any of it. He saw only the empty chair. The afternoon passed in fragments. He found himself standing by her desk, fingertips grazing the surface. A faint outline of her coffee cup remained, a small circle on the wood. He stared at it too long, as if it might explain something. That evening, he drove without a destination. The city lights blurred past his windshield neon signs. Rain-streaked windows, strangers crossing streets. Every face seemed to hold a piece of the life he'd avoided living. He pulled over near the waterfront, got out, and stood by the rail. The river moved slow beneath the streetlights, its surface catching gold and silver from the world above. He thought about her laugh, her stubborn honesty, the way she'd looked at him the night of the storm, not with judgment, but with understanding. And now, she was gone. He wondered when he'd started mistaking control for strength, silence for wisdom, distance for protection. His mother's voice echoed again. You hide behind work because it never leaves you, but it also never holds you. The thought lingered, quiet and sharp. He closed his eyes, the sound of the river filling the spaces he'd kept empty for too long. He stayed there until the chill crept through his coat, until the city fell half asleep around him. When he returned to the office the next day, her note was still on his desk. He didn't file it away. He didn't throw it out. He just read it again. Try living like it. He whispered the words under his breath, as if saying them aloud might make them truer. Outside, the sky was the color of ash, but the light was trying soft streaks of dawn breaking through the gray. He stood there, watching the sun rise over the buildings, his reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man learning what it meant to be alive. And somewhere between guilt and hope, something inside him shifted a crack in the armor, just wide enough for light to find its way through. The first sign of trouble came quietly. An email flagged urgent, the kind that never brings good news. By noon, it had turned into a full-blown storm. A client's campaign had gone sideways. Someone had leaked internal strategy notes to a competitor. Investors were panicking. And through it all, Ethan sat behind his glass desk, phone pressed to his ear, trying to sound calm while everything beneath his voice cracked. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built a career on controlling chaos. Now chaos was running his company, and he couldn't seem to catch up. Who approved that statement, he asked, sharp but weary. Rachel, I think, his assistant said. She thought it was what Maggie would have done. The name hung in the air like a missing heartbeat. He turned to the window. Outside, the sky over Portland was a dull gray, heavy with rain that refused to fall. His reflection stared back at him, hollow, distant, wearing a suit that suddenly felt too tight. He used to think people were interchangeable, replaceable, but Maggie's absence had left a kind of silence that echoed through every hallway. Meetings felt longer, ideas flatter. Even the laughter that used to ripple through the office break room had turned cautious, polite. By the third day of crisis, the company's biggest client threatened to pull their contract. That night, after the last call ended and the building went dark, Ethan sat alone in his office, the glow of his monitor flickering across the note she'd left behind. You're human. Try living like it. He whispered the words to the empty room, his voice catching somewhere between apology and regret. By morning, he made a decision he couldn't explain to anyone, not even himself. He packed a small bag, canceled his meetings, and drove east. The rain followed him out of the city, trailing in thin silver lines across the windshield. The farther he went, the quieter the world became. Fields replaced skyscrapers, trees replaced glass. The road stretched ahead like a confession waiting to be made. He reached Bend, Oregon, just before sunset. The town was small, unhurried, framed by distant mountains and the soft hum of life that didn't need to prove anything. He stopped at a local cafe to ask for directions, his voice careful, uncertain. Community Art Center, the barista repeated, smiling. 2 blocks down, past the bookstore. You can't miss it. He found the building a converted warehouse painted in faded blues and yellows. Laughter spilled out from an open door, the kind of laughter that came from people doing something they loved, not something they had to. Inside, children were painting on long tables covered in old newspapers. The scent of acrylic and wood filled the air. And there she was. Maggie stood near the back, hair tied up loosely, sleeves rolled to her elbows, helping a little girl mix colors on a palette. She looked lighter somehow. Not carefree, but grounded, like she'd finally stepped into a world that didn't demand perfection. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't move. He just watched her watch the way she smiled without effort, how her shoulders relaxed when she leaned in to listen. It was the most human thing he'd ever seen. When she finally turned and saw him, her expression changed, not anger exactly, but surprise laced with something more complicated. "Ethan," he swallowed. "Hi. You drove all the way here." He nodded. "I needed to see you." Why he didn't have an easy answer. "Because I finally understand what I ruined." She crossed her arms. Not defensive, just steady. "The company? No." His voice was low. "You." The word hung between them. Quiet, but heavy. The children's laughter faded as they began to clean up for the evening. She gestured toward the door. "Let's talk outside." The air was cool, the sky stretching in muted orange and lavender. They stood beside the wooden railing, the sound of brushes being rinsed faint behind them. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know, but I needed to." She looked at him, eyes calm but unreadable. "You think showing up fixes silence?" He shook his head. "No, but it's a start." She smiled small, sad. "You taught me something. You know." He raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound good? You taught me how silence can hurt louder than words." The sentence hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to explain that his silence had been fear, not apathy, that he'd thought staying quiet would protect her. But excuses felt cheap in the presence of truth. "I know," he said instead, "and I'm sorry." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then again. She leaned against the railing, eyes on the horizon. "When I left, I didn't hate you. I just didn't recognize you anymore. The man who fought for honesty, for decency, that wasn't the man sitting in that boardroom." He nodded slowly. "You're right. You let everyone believe it was my fault." "I know." "Why?" He hesitated, "Because I was afraid that if I defended you, I'd lose the company, the image, the control." "And did it work?" He almost smiled. "You see where I am, don't you?" She laughed once short, unguarded, then quiet again. He turned toward her. "I miss working with you. I don't miss working for you." That made him laugh, a real laugh, small and rough, fair. She looked at him, then really looked, and something in her expression softened. "You look tired. I am good," she said gently. "Maybe you're finally learning how to feel." He smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. They stood there in silence for a while, not awkward, just still. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in amber streaks. "Do you want to come in?" she asked finally. "The kids are painting tomorrow. We could use an extra pair of hands." He looked surprised. "You'd trust me with paint, only if you promise not to write a press release about it?" He grinned. "Deal." The light around them dimmed, soft and forgiving. He followed her back inside, the sound of laughter and brushes filling the air again. For the first time, he didn't feel like he needed to control it. He just listened. As the evening settled over the little town, Ethan realized he hadn't fixed anything, not yet. But he'd done something he hadn't done in a long time. He'd started, and sometimes, that was the only way back. The morning light in Bend had a way of softening everything it touched. The air smelled faintly of pine and paint, thinner from the art center down the street. Maggie sat by the wide window of her small rented office, papers spread out in uneven stacks, her laptop glowing with the first draft of something entirely her own. The sign outside the door still felt new. Thornton Communications, stories that matter. Just a handful of clients so far, all nonprofits, small voices, real causes. She liked that. It was quiet work, human work. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't mind. She was thinking not about deadlines, not about clients, but about the feeling of building something without asking permission. Freedom didn't roar. It hummed softly, like the sound of her mother's old sewing machine, steady and imperfect, but alive. The bell above the door jingled. She looked up and smiled faintly. "You're early," she said. Ethan stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked slightly out of place in her little office, his pressed shirt, his city shoes dusted with gravel. "I brought peace offerings," he said. "One's black." I remembered. She tilted her head. Points for accuracy. He handed her the cup. "And for persistence, that's still under review," she said, smiling into her sip. He chuckled, setting his coat on the chair opposite her. "So, this is it. Your empire. Don't call it that. What would you call it?" Then, she thought for a moment. "A beginning." He nodded, his eyes lingering on her a little too long before he looked around the sketches pinned to the wall, the cheap but bright curtains, the single fern wilting on the window sill. "You did this fast. I had a lot of practice starting over." There was no bitterness in her tone, just truth. He sat down. "I came to talk business." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous way to start a sentence with me." He smiled. "Hear me out. I want to offer you something, a partnership. My company could fund your studio. You'd have independence, full creative control, but with our network behind you." She set her cup down, slowly. "You mean your network?" "Well, yes." Her expression softened, but her words didn't. "Ethan, I appreciate it, really. But this," she gestured around, "that has to stay small. It has to stay mine." He nodded, eyes low. "I figured you'd say that. You didn't come all this way expecting a yes, did you?" He gave a quiet laugh. Maybe. She smiled. "Not today." The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was gentle, familiar. He looked out the window. A few kids were drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk outside the arts center. "You know," he said, "I thought I could rebuild everything. The company, my image, but none of it works without meaning. Turns out, you took that with you." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "No. Ethan, you lost it long before I left." He nodded. "You're right." And she saw it then, not the polished CEO, but the man who had started remembering how to feel. He started showing up after that. Not at her office, she made it clear she didn't need that, but at the arts center, at community events, places where no one cared who he was. He helped paint walls, carried boxes, stood beside volunteers half his age. He listened more than he spoke. Sometimes, when she caught sight of him from across a room, she almost didn't recognize him. He laughed easier now, made mistakes without freezing. Once, she saw him spill paint on his sleeve and just laugh, a sound that made something inside her quietly unclench. One Saturday afternoon, as they stacked paint cans in the storage room, she said, "You know, I didn't expect you to stay this long." He smiled, brushing dust off his hands. "Neither did I." "What changed? I stopped trying to fix things," he said. "Started just showing up." She nodded. "That's harder than it sounds." He met her eyes. "You were right about silence. It hurts louder than words. But it also taught me how to listen." She didn't answer right away. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows, turning everything gold and quiet. "You're learning," she said softly. "From the best," he said, half a smile in his voice. Weeks turned into months. Her little studio grew one new client, then 2. She hired a part-time assistant, painted the walls a soft cream, and bought a new fern that refused to wilt. Ethan still stopped by sometimes, never uninvited. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about nothing at all. One evening, they watched the sun set from the porch of the arts center, mugs of coffee warming their hands. "You know," she said, "it's strange. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone." He looked at her. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think it means knowing who to let in." He nodded. "Quiet. So, do I get to be one of those people?" She didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, really looked the lines near his eyes softer now, the weight on his shoulders lighter. He'd stopped performing. "Finally," she said. "Maybe, if you keep showing up." He grinned. "I can do that." The streetlights flickered on, one by one, as the sky turned a deeper blue. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was full of possibility, of forgiveness still finding its way. Maggie glanced at him, her voice gentle. "You know, Ethan, maybe this is what living looks like." He smiled, eyes still on the horizon. "If it is, I don't ever want to stop." And for the first time in a long time, there were no walls between them, just two people not chasing, not running, simply learning how to stand still together. The air cooled. Somewhere, a child laughed, and a wind chime sang softly near the door. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet hum of the world she'd built small, steady, and hers. Her quiet rebellion had never been about walking away. It was about finally walking toward herself. The morning was pale and still, the kind of quiet that sits in the bones before the world wakes. Ethan drove with the windows cracked open, letting the chill air bite at his hands. The road wound through Oregon's countryside, lined with cedar and fog, each mile both heavier and lighter than the last. He hadn't made this drive in years, maybe because forgiveness, especially your own, takes longer than grief. When he reached the small cemetery, the sky was a dull silver. He parked under an oak tree that had grown thicker since the last time he was here. The ground was soft with dew. His shoes left shallow impressions as he walked the narrow path between rows of old names, familiar and forgotten. He stopped when he saw it. The simple stone. Daniel Cole. 1979-2018. No quote, no message. Just the truth of a life that ended too soon. He stood there for a long time, his breath visible in the cold. Then, almost instinctively, he laughed a small, broken sound. "You'd hate this," he said quietly. The plain stone, the silence. He crouched, tracing his brother's name with a fingertip. "You'd tell me to get over myself and bring flowers, but you knew I never knew what kind." The wind stirred the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once and fell silent again. "I thought I could outrun it," he continued. "The guilt, the noise, all of it. I buried myself in work. Pretended that made me the strong one. But you—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You were the brave one. You knew when to stop pretending." He closed his eyes. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of wind against the stone, the taste of cold air, the ache that had been waiting for this moment of surrender. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for not being there, for thinking silence was strength." He stayed there until the morning light began to shift, soft gold creeping over the hills. When he finally stood, his shoulders felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because he'd stopped fighting it. Back in the car, he sat for a while before starting the engine. His phone buzzed with a dozen notifications, emails, messages, reminders. He turned it face down. Then he pulled out a small notebook and began to write. No rehearsing, no drafts, just the truth. "Dear Maggie, you called me arrogant once. You were right. I built walls and called them standards. I confused control with courage. I kept people at a distance and told myself it was for their sake. But I think we both know it was for mine." He paused, watching a leaf drift past the windshield. Then he kept going. But I'd rather be foolishly honest with you now than perfectly silent forever. I don't know if I deserve another chance, not with you. Not even with myself, but I'd like to try. Not to fix what's gone, but to build what's left. If you can forgive me, fine. If you can't, I'll understand. I just needed you to know that for once. I'm not hiding behind work, or words, or fear. This is me trying. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into an envelope, and drove straight to Bend. The sky darkened as he reached the little town. Lights blinked on in windows along Main Street, and the faint hum of life filled the air, laughter spilling from a diner, the low strum of music from a bar. He stopped in front of her studio, the same one he'd helped paint a few months ago. The windows were still lit. Inside, Maggie sat at her desk, head bent over her laptop, her hair tucked behind one ear. She looked peaceful, steady. He didn't go in. He left the envelope by the door, weighed it down with a small stone, and walked away before she could look up. Inside. A few minutes later. Maggie noticed it. A white envelope, her name written in his familiar handwriting, neat but pressed, like every word cost something. She hesitated before opening it. The paper was warm from his hands, faintly smudged with rain. She read the letter once, then again, slower. When she reached the line, "I'd rather be foolishly honest with you now than perfectly silent forever," her breath caught. It wasn't dramatic, no tears spilling over, no trembling hands, just a stillness, deep and quiet, that moved through her like the exhale of something long held. She leaned back in her chair, eyes on the letter. The sound of the rain outside softened against the window. Somewhere in the back room, the heater clicked on. The world went on breathing, patient and unhurried. She thought about him at the cemetery, about the version of Ethan who used to live by rules and appearances, and the man now learning how to live by heartbeats and mistakes. She folded the letter neatly, fingers lingering on the paper. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to protect herself from him. Instead, she whispered, almost to the empty room, maybe love doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe it just needs to be brave. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the rain had turned into a fine mist. Outside, the street lamp glowed golden in the damp air. She smiled, faint but real. Maggie didn't rush to call him, didn't plan a response. Some feelings didn't need to be spoken, yet they just needed to be held long enough to feel true. She closed her eyes and imagined him driving home, headlights carving a narrow path through the dark, his hand resting against the wheel, his chest a little lighter. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment. Maybe it was the quiet decision to see someone's truth and not turn away. She placed the letter on the windowsill beside her fern, the same plant he once teased her about never keeping alive. Its leaves were greener now, stronger. The rain finally stopped, and in that stillness, something in her shifted too. Not the old ache, not quite love yet, but something close. A decision forming in the soft space between remembering and beginning. Maybe, just maybe, love was worth another risk. The night air hummed with quiet anticipation. String lights crisscrossed the courtyard of the Bend Community Arts Center, casting soft golden halos over tables lined with mason jars and wildflowers. It wasn't a glamorous event, just neighbors, volunteers, and a few local donors gathered to raise money for new art supplies. But to Maggie, it felt like something far more sacred, a celebration of small things, of beginnings. She moved through the crowd with her clipboard, laughing softly as she guided a group of kids carrying trays of homemade cookies. Her dress was simple dark blue cotton, hair pinned loosely. There was a steadiness in her now, the kind that comes from having nothing left to prove. Somewhere near the back, unseen. Ethan watched. He hadn't told her he was coming. The moment he stepped into the courtyard, the air felt different, sharper, heavier, alive with memory. He'd spent weeks thinking about this night, not because of the gala itself, but because of what he needed to say and finally had the courage to. As the auction wound down, the host took the stage. Before we close, we have a surprise guest who'd like to say a few words. Maggie looked up from her table, puzzled. Then she saw him, Ethan, standing in the corner, straightening his tie like a man about to walk into fire. He climbed the steps to the small wooden stage. The crowd quieted. The soft clink of glassware faded. He cleared his throat, the microphone catching the faint tremor in his voice. "Good evening," he began. "I'm Ethan Cole. Some of you know me from Portland, most probably don't. And that's for the best." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. He smiled faintly. "I came here tonight because there's someone in this room who changed the way I see the world, and I didn't want to wait another day to say thank you." Maggie froze. The sound of her own heartbeat drowned out the chatter around her. Ethan's gaze found her steady, quiet, unflinching. "A year ago, I thought leadership was about control, about being right, about keeping your distance so no one could see the cracks." He paused, breath slow. "Then someone came along and called me arrogant." Laughter again, softer this time, warm. He smiled, and she was right, completely right. But she also taught me something else, that leadership without empathy is just noise. That strength isn't silence. It's the courage to listen. Maggie's throat tightened. The courtyard was so still. She could hear the faint rustle of leaves overhead. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object, a fountain pen, its metal worn smooth from years of use. "This pen belonged to my father," he said. "He used it to sign every major deal of his career. When I took over the company, I kept it as a reminder to live up to his standards. But tonight, I realized something." He held the pen up under the lights. "It shouldn't remind me of who I was trying to be. It should remind me of who helped me become better." He turned toward her again. "Maggie Thornton, this is for you, the woman who rewrote me." The applause came slowly, then swelled, not thunderous, but heartfelt. The kind that came from people who understood they were witnessing something true. Maggie stood still for a long moment. The night seemed to breathe around her. Then, almost without realizing it, she made her way to the stage. When she reached him, he handed her the pen. Their fingers brushed, and something familiar sparked, not the sharp electricity of old tension, but the quiet warmth of recognition. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're still a little arrogant." He smiled, eyes soft. "You're still right." They both laughed quiet, unguarded, the kind of laughter that carried relief and history and grace. The crowd clapped again, but for a moment it felt like there was no one else in the world, just two people standing under warm lights, finding their way back to something fragile and real. Maggie looked down at the pen, then up at him. "You know," she said softly, "you didn't have to do this. I did," he said. "For me, for you, for once. I wanted to say the right thing out loud." The band in the corner began to play something slow and familiar, a soft jazz tune, almost hesitant. The sound floated between them like a memory. He offered his hand. "One dance." She hesitated, then smiled. "You're terrible at dancing. I'm learning." She placed her hand in his. They moved slowly, barely swaying. His hand rested lightly on her back, hers on his shoulder. The pen glinted in her grasp like a small promise. Around them, people began to talk again, to laugh, to live. But they stayed in that small circle of stillness, moving gently to the rhythm of something that wasn't quite music anymore, something quieter. Forgiveness, maybe. Or the sound of beginning again. When the song ended, he didn't let go right away. Neither did she. They just stood there, breathing the same calm air. The applause faded into the soft hum of conversation. The night stretched open, vast and gentle. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like he was performing. He wasn't the CEO or the man trying to prove anything. He was just Ethan, And she was Maggie. He leaned closer, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled, her eyes shining in the glow of the lights. "Thank you for finally showing up." He nodded once. Simple, true. As they stepped down from the stage, side by side, the world felt different, not louder, not brighter, just more real. And somewhere inside them both, something finally settled. Not an ending, a release, a grace. And the quiet joy of two hearts finding their way home, not perfectly, but honestly. The morning began the way most of their mornings did, quietly imperfect. The sun stretched lazily through the curtains of their little coastal home, turning the walls the color of honey. The sound of waves rolled in from somewhere beyond the dunes, steady and unhurried. In the kitchen, something was burning. "Maggie," Ethan called, standing over the toaster with a mix of concern and amusement. "You're doing it again." She appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from the shower, wearing his old sweatshirt and a look that said, I know. "It's artisanal," she said, rescuing the blackened slice of toast with a spatula. "Smoky flavor, very on trend." He laughed, shaking his head. "You could just not burn it and rob you of your morning entertainment," she teased. Their dog, Charlie, a rescue mutt with too much energy and not enough coordination, barked at the sound of the toaster popping again. Ethan reached down to pat his head. "At least one of you listens?" Maggie grinned. "That's debatable." The house smelled like coffee and ocean salt, and a hint of chaos, the kind that made it feel alive. A gentle wind slipped through the window, rustling the notes she'd left on the table, reminders for client calls. A grocery list, written half in doodles. Ethan poured 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside her plate. "You've got paint on your elbow again." She looked down. "Occupational hazard." He smiled. "You know, when I imagined life by the sea, I pictured something a little more organized." "Then you shouldn't have married me," she said lightly. He reached across the table, brushing a thumb over her wrist. "Oh, I absolutely should have." For a while, they just sat there, the quiet between them, warm and full. The kind of quiet you only earn after years of speaking the wrong way, of learning the rhythm of another person's breath. Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He didn't move. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you going to check it?" He shook his head. "It can wait." The sea wind carried the sound of gulls. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's wind chime sang a gentle tune. Maggie watched him, still precise, still calm. The same man who used to measure his worth in hours worked and emails sent. Now he measured it in mornings like this. "You've changed," she said softly. "So have you." She smiled. "No, I've just stopped trying to be someone else." He reached for her hand. "That's the best kind of change." There was a time when their lives had been defined by tension, by everything unspoken between them. Now it was defined by the small things. The clink of mugs, the scrape of a chair, the way he'd remember to leave the porch light on for her when she worked late, the way she'd tuck a note in his pocket before a long day, never anything grand, just a line or two. "You've got this. Don't forget to breathe. Dinner's on me, probably takeout. After breakfast." Maggie slipped on her sandals and went outside. The yard was small, just a patch of wild grass and lavender, but it opened to a view of the ocean. The morning fog was lifting, thin as breath. Ethan followed, holding his coffee, standing beside her in quiet awe of how ordinary happiness could feel. "Remember when we thought love was supposed to fix everything?" she said. He nodded. "Now it just holds everything." She looked up at him, her eyes bright but calm. "That's enough, isn't it?" "It's more than enough." They stood there, side by side, the wind teasing at her hair. Charlie chased a gull down the beach, barking with wild joy. Inside, the kettle began to whistle softly, forgotten on the stove. Neither of them moved. The sound blended with the ocean, becoming part of the rhythm of the day. Ethan took a slow breath, feeling the salt air fill his lungs. There was still work, still life's clutter waiting, but somehow the noise no longer felt like weight. Love hadn't made him lighter. It had simply taught him how to carry things better. He looked at her, at the way the morning light wrapped around her shoulders, and thought about all the versions of them that had come before: the awkward, the angry, the proud, the broken. All of it had led here to this small, beautiful simplicity. "Hey," she said suddenly, nudging his arm. "Do you ever miss it? What the chaos of the city, the deadlines, the constant rush?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "Sometimes, but only in the same way I miss being 20. I wouldn't go back," she laughed. "Fair." The laughter lingered, carried away by the wind. A gull circled overhead, calling once before disappearing into the sky. The sun rose higher, painting everything in pale gold. Ethan leaned down, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "You know, you still burn toast, and you still alphabetize the spice rack." She shot back. He smiled. "Balance. Balance," she echoed, squeezing his hand. They turned back toward the house, the sound of waves following them like a quiet song. Inside, the kettle had stopped whistling. The air was warm, the kind of warmth that lingers even when no one's speaking. Maggie paused at the doorway, looking around the messy table, the half-read books, the photos pinned to the fridge, all the little imperfections that somehow made the space theirs. And then she said it, half to herself, half to him, the words that felt like a full circle. "Love didn't fix us," she murmured. "It taught us to listen, to speak softly, to begin again every morning." Ethan turned to her, smiling. "Every morning," he repeated. She walked over, slid her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, like the ocean outside, constant, unpretending. He kissed her hair, breathing her in. "You know," he said, voice low, "you once called me hot and arrogant." She smiled into his shirt. "And now," he whispered, "you just call me home." Outside, the sea kept moving endless, forgiving, alive, and inside that small house by the coast, two people began another ordinary day, the kind that somehow felt extraordinary. Love, in the end, is not about perfection. It's about patience, about learning to listen, even when words fail. Ethan and Maggie's story reminds us that healing doesn't come from grand gestures or flawless promises. It comes quietly through forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to begin again. They learned that love doesn't erase the past. It helps us live with it more gently. For those of us who have walked through years of loss, pride, or regret, this story offers a simple truth. It's never too late to soften, to reach out, to speak kindly, because real love, the kind that lasts, isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet act of choosing one another every morning. It's burnt toast and shared laughter. It's silence that feels safe. In a world that rushes toward perfection, may we remember this: love's greatest strength lies not in fixing what's broken, but in holding what remains with grace, tenderness, and time. Thank you so much for listening to this story and for sharing a few quiet moments with us today. If you felt something, a smile, a memory, or just a little warmth, please take a second to share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating stories that touch the heart and remind us of what truly matters. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you love.